In 3rd grade, Maury Povich diagnosed me with Tourette syndrome. Well, not exactly. My mom was watching an episode of his on the topic and she put 2 and 2 together. I was diagnosed a week later. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am now. I am a Jewish youth professional. I have bachelor's degrees in psychology and youth outreach through the arts, and a master's degree in child advocacy and policy. I'm also a stand-up comedian, probably because I see the world a little bit differently. One where eye level is 4'7", give or take like 1/8 of an inch. And barking without provocation is a completely normal part of my day. I remember spending a lot of time thinking about the fact that I saw the world differently, and that the world had such double standards. For instance, when I took my dog for a walk and he started barking, everyone was fine with that. But when I started barking, people suddenly had an issue. Tourette's doesn't affect me too much as an adult. Did I explain Tourette's yet? I don't think I did. Tourette's is a neurological disorder. It is characterized by involuntary movements and noises called tics. Here's how I like to explain Tourette's. Everybody has a fence in their brain, so tell your arm to go up in the air. Thank you for following directions. You sent a signal through your fence and put your arm up in the air. Well, in my brain, there is a piece of the fence missing. So signals are getting sent that I'm not meaning to send. Tourette's doesn't affect me too much as an adult. Sometimes I go to bed a little extra tired. Every now and again, a guy will be like, "Are you winking at me?" And I'll say something like, "Either that or I have a neurological disorder." Ego. But as an adolescent, Tourette's was my identity. In fact, at one point, I had the worst diagnosed case of Tourette's in America. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. No neurologist had ever seen a case worse than mine. At my worst, I broke my neck from snapping my head back so hard that my bone went into my skull and shattered. I tensed my stomach muscles so hard that my appendix ruptured. I was in and out of school for 2 years on cocktails of medication. Essentially, my body didn't match my brain. In 8th grade, I remember the nurse leaning over me and saying, "Pam, do you need to use the potty?" I was like, "No, do you?" That same year, my Tourette's was so bad that I was kicked out of my congregation. I was asked to leave a space, but it felt more profound than that. It felt like I was being told that Judaism wasn't for me. When my dad died, the Jewish community rallied around my family. But when my Tourette's got so bad that I was hard to communicate with, depressed, disruptive, the Jewish community had no idea how to respond. So they didn't. We are great at supporting somebody in a time of need, a crisis, a death, something that has a beginning and an end. But what about the whole person? When a child sees somebody who's different than them, maybe somebody in a wheelchair, somebody who's homeless, somebody who's missing a limb, they understandably have questions. And we want to teach our kids to have empathy and to be good people. Look how much you've been blessed with. I've heard variations of that message more times than I could count. You should be wonderful to those people because look how much you've been blessed with. But what we're really saying is, thank God that's not me. Or what bad fortune for them. Or maybe worst of all, thank God I'm whole. But that message is horrible. It others people. Sometimes I hear the air get sucked out of the room when somebody says the word inclusion. It's this broad umbrella buzzword that's been used so many times. Sometimes it feels like it no longer has any meaning. For most of my adolescence, inclusion felt like a bad word. Because when it was being used to fight for me or stick up for me or as a reason the community couldn't do what they had planned because they had to accommodate me, a kid with special needs. In 9th grade, I had the opportunity to go away to this incredible boarding school. It wasn't a school for kids with disabilities. It was more a place that celebrated individuality and creativity. It pushed students to be their best selves and outside of our comfort zones. I remember being in 9th grade math class. And up until this point, I'd been so accustomed to being asked to leave a room when my Tourette's became disruptive and allowed to return when it was under control. And as I was sitting in math class that day, I started making almost a metronome-type sound. And my math teacher said, "Pam," and I got up to leave, as I had so many times in the past. And instead he said, Pam sounds like a metronome. Let's write a song about math. And we did. We wrote an entire CD about math with me sounding like a welcomed accompaniment in the background. In that classroom, in that moment, inclusion took a turn in my head. It no longer felt like what the community couldn't do because I was a part of it, and started feeling like what the community got to do because I was a part of it, because they were learning and growing with every member. Inclusion is creativity. If we look at the Torah, it's like a cast of characters of people with disabilities. But the story of Moses stands out. Moses had a disability, a speech impediment, and God chose Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. No easy task. And Moses pretty much told God, nope, not gonna do it. I have a disability. And I don't really feel like I should put words in God's mouth, but I'm gonna go ahead and put some words in God's mouth. God was like Mose. I would imagine that was God's nickname for Moses. God was like Mose. Yes, you have a disability. And yes, you can do this. And yes, Aaron, he's over here to be an accommodation should you need it. And yes, you're gonna be a rock star. God got creative. God provided support, and God thought outside of the box. And as we now know, Moses ended up being one of the greatest leaders in our religion. If anybody here has ever taken an improv class or workshop, they have the right idea. The real only rule of improv is this idea of yes and. This idea that if you're in a scene with somebody creating it on the spot and they say something like, we're on the moon, but I need new shoes. You don't say, no, we're not. You say something like, good thing there's a moon shoe store right over there. That's yes-anding. You don't necessarily say yes and, it's more of a mindset where you accept what's happening as truth and you build off of it. When the Jews accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai, nowhere is it written that some of the Jews were in the back because they were barking, and nowhere is it written that everybody was able to walk up to accept the Torah, and nowhere is it written that everybody was able to see every part of the Torah. But if everyone was there, then Torah and Judaism needs to be accessible to everyone. It was easier to get all of the Jews in one room to accept 613 commandments than it was to get some of the Jews in one room to accept me. It took me a long time to feel Jewish again. I came back to Judaism because of Jewish summer camp, because of Goldman Union Camp Institute in Zionsville, Indiana. They decided to say yes, and they decided that everything that they tried, they'd root in Jewish values. B'Tselem Elohim, Kehila Kadosha, words that our kids didn't just learn, they lived. That first summer that I applied to be a counselor, my Tourette's was still pretty disruptive. In fact, at that point, I still had the part of Tourette's that sometimes had me yelling bad words. I should say, most people with Tourette's don't have that part of Tourette's. It's like an extra special part that I was lucky enough to go through. How scary must it have been for that camp to hire somebody who sometimes uncontrollably yells the F word? And I remember sitting in a room with 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade campers to explain Tourette's, and instead, we talked about how all of us have something that makes us unique. My Tourette's being one of the things that makes me unique. And you know what the kids did? They accepted that I was their counselor, the same as they accepted that another counselor had dreads and another counselor was training for a marathon. They accepted me as their counselor. And that summer when they had questions, instead of explaining it away or saying something like, you should be thankful you're not going through something like that, we talked about it. We unpacked it. We talked about how all of these pieces, when they come together, they create something incredible. They make that camp something unique and special and Jewish. And that summer when I accidentally yelled the F word, all of the counselors in unison would say, is a bad word. That camp yes-anded me back into Jewish communal life. Creativity is not new to the Jewish people. In fact, our religion is full of improvisation and yes-anding. Judaism is creative. In fact, when the temple was destroyed, prayer was an innovation. The Jewish people could have said, the temple was destroyed, but that's how we were Jewish, and given up. but instead they said, this is our truth. What do we need to continue doing to be Jewish? Judaism has always been willing to change and adapt as long as we've been willing to be intentional about it, and that doesn't negate our tradition or our laws. When I was first hired in the position that I'm in now, part of my job is to run events for hundreds of teenagers. And I have a lot on my mind, as you can imagine, at those events, like health and safety. And because of that, inclusion wasn't always at the top of my radar. So my first year, I hired a social worker to come to my event and make a list of everything that we can be doing better. It wasn't easy to admit that we weren't perfect at inclusion, especially because it meant so much to me. But having that list of concrete things that we could be doing was the most beneficial thing that I could have done. If we have development and communication staff, everything that they do, they filter through that lens. Why not do the same with inclusion? Inclusion is no longer about looking at people with special needs as a them. It's about looking at our communities as a we, with every person having something to offer. Inclusion creates communities where people can be uniquely them, where people feel comfortable to grapple with their Jewish identity because, well, they're engaged in their Jewish communities. I'll be honest, sometimes I get sick of talking about Tourette's. We get it, I'm twitchy. But we live in a world that doesn't accommodate, let alone celebrate having a disability, which is why I'm so willing to continue sending the message, thank God I'm different. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mishaneh habriot. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes creatures different. I have a disability. I will always have a disability, and I am whole. And if that camp hadn't been willing to create a community with me in mind, at best, I don't think I'd be Jewish today. And at worst, well, I don't want to think about that. Inclusion is not about what we can't do because people with special needs are a part of our community. Inclusion is about what we get to do because we learn and we grow with every single member. Thank you.
The North American Jewish narrative reflects clear distinctions between blacks and Jews. It is as if Jews are somehow all white, and black folks, well, somehow we can't be Jewish. And it is this idea of white as integral to Jewish that deeply informs who and what we imagine when we think about the organized Jewish world.